Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and it's a bit of light relief this time. So this is another video, but this is a bit of light relief. This is not related to the upcoming Covert Ops expansion. This is just me doing another natter on my Field Marshal run this month, because I kind of will probably try and do these occasionally. I know people make like cool videos and stuff, which is also fun, but I'm just going to talk about how my Field Marshal run went, what deck I was playing, and give my usual advice on how it goes. So, Kards Content Creator, member of the Kards Contributor Program, all that good stuff, like, follow, subscribe, you know the drill. Usual opening for Field Marshal stuff. So my advice will endlessly be pick your time for when trying to get Field Marshal or climbing the ranks is most productive for you. Particularly, however, in the push to get to Field Marshal. At the beginning and end of the season, it can be the hardest time to do it, because that is the time when people are most likely to be pushing, either because they want to get Field Marshal early season so they can start climbing and competing on ladder, or because at the end of the season they want to get Field Marshal and make sure that they get their reward for next season. So those are the two times when you might get the most strong decks and competitive players, whereas in the middle of the season you might have a slightly easier run. In fact, people have notably done so. Because I'm me, and because of the way that I approach this game, I always try and do my Field Marshal climb in the first few days of the season, because I enjoy the challenge. Note, I don't compete. I've said this before. I'm very aware that I could, if I wish, push to get to OCC and all of that stuff, but I honestly, I don't have the time. I don't have the time to devote to it, nor the motivation to do so. Who knows, one day I might, but at the moment it's just not a thing. However, I do like a challenge, and to get a chance to play against some competitive players and against some competitive decks. And I feed that itch for myself every month by pushing for Field Marshal early. So this month, my Field Marshal run was interesting. As with last month, it started a little bit difficult, and then I eventually found my way on. Now, for context, last month my Field Marshal run was really quite good. I bounced around for a bit, had some very, very bad starts, but then I got on a roll with a specific deck, and my actual run to Field Marshal, I think, totaled round about 2 hours, just under, which is really good time for me. It's the fastest I've ever pulled it off. This month was longer. I think it took me about 5 hours total play time to get to Field Marshal from rank 6, which contextually is irrelevant. This isn't a competition, it's not a measuring stick, but if I'm open about the difference in time, then you might see how the impact is on people. For me, that is a tiring climb to Field Marshal, because it's more time than I'm used to spending on it. I generally average about 3 hours to get to Field Marshal most months. Anyway, the point being, I eventually found that the meta this month was so varied in places and filled with certain kinds of decks that what I needed was a deck that didn't have bad matchups. But that means playing a deck that's slightly harder to play. So, I'm going to talk about the deck that I did, and then I'm going to show some post-Field Marshal gameplay with some commentary at the end, so you have some idea about what's going on with it, but just because you might be interested. But anyway, let's hop over and we'll talk about the deck that actually got me to Field Marshal, rather than the decks that didn't. I tried all the usual suspects, played some Exile, played some Ger Aggro, played a tiny bit of Frontline, but I really wasn't in a place to do that. Might have actually been a good bet this month, but I've been doing a lot of playtesting with Frontline in the background for the new patch, and ideas about substitute cards before new stuff becomes available, so I just wasn't in the mode for it. I got a decent start on the Beautiful Madness deck that I did a video on that was No in 5's original invention, but then I hit a wall. Anyway, eventually I settled on a deck that did in fact just get me to Field Marshal. So let's go look at it. This is a Japan-Poland Legions deck. It's doing the rounds at the minute. Lots of different people have played it. I know J King's played it. I know some other top players have played it. There are different variations on the list. This is the one I ran. That got me to Field Marshal. It is not the most intuitive list in design, because it's got quite a few kind of random one-offs and stuff. So you've got a chunk of the traditional Japan aggro tools in here. So you are running a couple of expansion, you're running the Type 94s, you're running 15th Cavalry, but you're only running 2 of them, and then 1 Yokosuka. 33rd Recon, because you want something that gets you some draw. So you've got a decent number of 1-drops. We're not bothered about 2-drops. We'll get to that in a minute, because of the way that this deck actually tempos out. So this deck does not play on it doesn't play on a perfectly traditional curve, because you are reliant on aggro tools to get you started. So your mulligan will generally want to have aggro tools in it, and in a perfect world, a copy of Plan West. We'll get to this in a minute. The aim is basically use your early aggro tools to get some damage in early, keep the front line, and then by ideally on curve on turn 3, drop Plan West, and after that use intel-based cards to buff, deploy, and affect legions. So, cards that are relevant to this, we have obviously 33rd Recon for standard damage, but we're also running 3 copies of the 56th, and I'm going to call this card out because you don't want to be playing this card as a 1-drop unless you have to. The value on this card for us is not really in its speed, it's in its text. It has Intel 1, which means when we drop this, all of our legions get +1/+1. And then we can use it as a clearance tool, because destruction deal 1 damage to each enemy unit can be used very effectively. This is actually a later game tool. We really want to be seeing 15th Cavalry, Signal Regiment would be great. 56, not 56, the 33rd Recon, the Yokosuka, and of course 15th Cavalry are all good early drops, and then we want to get Plan West down, and then ideally follow it up with 56th Recon, the Karas. This is such a good value card. It won't stick very often, because if your opponent knows the deck, they're going to remove this very quickly, because when you deploy the Karas, of course you get the buff because it's an intel card, but then you also get Section 2 added to your hand at the end of every turn, which gives you card draw, and it's effectively pay 2, draw a card, and buff all your legions by +1/+1 is how we're playing it, and they're not going to want to see us do that regularly. Scouting Party. Again, we want to play this after we've got legions on the board for intel, and then it gives us recon to push forward and get some draw. We sort of end up checkerboarding the front line with kind of legions something a lot of the time. I'm going to come back to Shinano. Second Raiding Brigade's there because it's just amazing removal. Audacity is there because it's Audacity. It's another incredible card and good removal if your opponent's only got 1 target in their support line, on the board rather. Orp Bliskavika. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but my Polish is awful, and I have a Polish friend who would punish me for this, because, you know, she would point out that I should be able to pronounce this better, but I think it's Orp Bliskavika. This card is so good in this deck. We're only running 1 of, but it's just great when you play it, because obviously it's buffing your legions, but it's also giving you HQ defense, and the random order can sometimes turn out to be really good. I've had some great steals with this. On the Ascent, this is a great value tool for when things aren't going your way and you just need to reset the board state and get an advantage. Bombing Raid, it's Bombing Raid. Type 96 is there to control enemy air and give you some artillery. Winter Regiment. I mean, it's Winter Regiment, it's a value train. And then we've got Underground State. We want 1 copy of this because it's quite handy at times to just push a negative position back. Dragon Slayer. On-curve Dragon Slayer is still a good play. Tarnau, if you don't know Legions, Tarnau is a really important card in Legions, because whenever you play an intel card, you add a Legions to your support line and draw a card when this is on the board. It's amazing. Shiden is a finisher. We know Shiden is a finisher. And then we have one of my favourite cards in this deck. This is Uprising, and used well, Uprising is such a good tool, but you have to learn to use it well. This is a great board clear. In an ideal game, you never play this. Honestly, you don't. If the game goes according to plan, you will never play this. Because it rips your own damage units apart as well. However, you will keep a count in your head, ideally, of how many Polish units have gone down, because this is really good. This can turn negative board states into winning board states on a dime. It's amazing. Learning to use it well is one of the keys to this deck. Speaking of learning to use cards well being key to this deck, this is one of the few decks out there in which I still believe that IGN Shinano actually has good value. Now, I have been on record as saying in classic Japan-Germany aggro, and for that matter Jalvage, IGN Shinano just doesn't have value. The board states are unlikely to get to the point whereby you're getting enough out of it to feel like it's worth playing it. Now, other people disagree, but it is my opinion, and it is shared by others. Shinano, in this deck, you are going to see board states where the value on this thing is just bonkers. Because you're going to have legions, you're going to have units deployed, and your opponent's also going to be deploying units to try and get you. You can get some board states where you can exploit the living daylights out of this card. Particularly if you drop this, sack a bunch of legions, and are then in a position to use Uprising later on, you can turn incredibly negative board states around. That's the general idea behind this deck. Okay, so that's the principles of the deck. Okay, so there's the principles of the deck. Now to talk about how the deck plays. We're going to pop over and I will go over some games that I played on this deck. These are post-Field Marshal. I did not record my Field Marshal run because I didn't want to put myself under pressure. But we'll hop over and take a look at some records that I did get post-Field Marshal to talk about how the deck plays, just because I know sometimes people are interested in this stuff. Also, interesting to note, this deck does not take really any hit at all in the new patch, so it might still be usable if you want something consistent while you're playing around, learning your way around the new thing. I don't know whether it will be or not, but I have a feeling it might be, because this deck is very consistent. Okay, so here we are. This game actually starts mid-play. Apologies for that, I had some recording issues. But we'll take a look and talk about it. So you can see at this point I've had some early pressure, and this is the turn 3 play that I talked about, which is why I'm keeping this. Because this is the big Plan West turn. We put Plan West down now, and our opponent is on Brit, which you're going to see a lot of. And our opponent now is going to take some time to consider what they want to do. So now, we're kind of looking at this board. Bomber run, okay, so our opponent is... We're always keeping an eye on this. How many legions have died and Polish units have gone down? Now, we could out of the mist onto a honey for value here, but we have other options, and I believe I take this one, which is I push this and play Scouting Party. So this gives me a 3-3 in the front line, which makes my opponent have to trade out both honeys if they want rid of it, or play some kind of removal. Not worried about the HQ defense gain, we'll get to that later. Right, so we're going to out of the mist a honey, because value. Then Orp Bliskavika. I love this card. We're not sure what we're going to poach. We get some draw, which we don't mind, and some HQ defense, and now we have a 4-4 in the front line, and are asking our opponent a lot of really difficult questions. So our opponent now has a difficult board state to deal with. Now, of course, they're Brit, so we know they're going to have board clears, but we don't mind that, because they're now handing us card draw. Quite a lot of card draw, and this, unless they have a way of reducing the defense of our legions, we're still going to get 8 to 12 damage out of the legions, and we just pulled Shinano. Might be relevant later. So, these units are dead, so we're not really worried about doing much with them unless we need to make space. However, Signal Regiment is not good for our opponent right now. Told you it might be relevant later. This is a good point to talk about IGN Shinano and the fact that we had a board state here where we are going to get 8 damage out of Shinano for 3, and we're pretty much guaranteeing clearing their health gain. Plus then we get 4 from this. The maths just stacked up so well on Shinano there, and you will get turns where this will happen on that deck. And it will happen, and you will get those turns, and they are amazing, and they tend to make your opponent really have to think. I'm clicking on the Ascent. There was the thought of, should I have on the Ascented to get all of that drawback? But ultimately, I'd rather just get 3 more cards out of it. ASW Patrol, unfortunately, does deny us 1 card of draw, but that's actually okay, because we don't want overhanded, and our opponent is done. This will also happen, because this deck is frustrating to play against at times. So, we get the win. We tick through all of the joyful boxes at the end. And we will be back with the next one. Okay. New opponent. So, as usual, first thing we're looking for is their HQ, Cherbourg. So this is US, so it's either going to be Ramp or Frontline. Pitching, or holding onto the Recon because card draw and Out of the Mist because it can be good value. We're very glad to see this is actually really a very good starting hand. So we have a really good curve in front of us. Turn 1 obviously is 15th Cav. Turn 2 will be swing with the Cav, 33rd Recon onto the board, probably depending on what we draw. We might end up using Out of the Mist to reclaim something and we see what we draw, but the key is we do have a plan west in hand, which will be handy. That gives us the turn 3 we want. And of course, we're on the play. So, obviously 15th Cav to the front line, pretty standard aggro start, which will be the way that this plays out a lot. They're going to trade out. I don't mind this trade. They're wasting a buff on it to try and clear the front line. That's okay. We're not super credit efficient on this deck in the early turns, and we don't mind losing some credit efficiency on the early turns because it's totally worth it for what we can do later. So, you could push here and draw. It is an option. Depending on who you're playing against, you may want to, but also I'm west, and you have to think about it. Now, I thought for a minute, and then in the end I decided actually the US is probably going to want some bodies out there, but they're not going to get anything super heavy on turn 3 into the front line that I can't deal with. So I'd rather have the bodies to start getting value, because then next turn, if I don't get some form of intel, which I don't, really, we can push up. So this is where we start checkerboarding. So we've got the unit flanked by the 2 legions. And we get some draw. We're digging. We'd like to find some intel. We don't, but we do have a really good board clear for later should we need it. And of course, we've got the 94 early, which is great because this can come out on a flank. Devil's Brigade's not a shock. They trade out and remove one of our pieces. We've got a second copy of Uprising. This isn't great, but it's not the end of the world. Audacity's a really easy play here because it basically removes. And then, of course, this is a pretty quick turn for me. I've been playing this deck a lot. You might want to slow down if you're trying it out until you learn the feel and the pacing and the general cadence of this deck. So, 2 damage, 3 damage, the buff's on, and we have 8 damage on board. And our opponent has nothing. And it's turn 5. Naked 99th, always a sign that your opponent is struggling. Almost certainly trying to enable a tank. Yep, there it comes. So they're going to trade out. Trading out on the legions, probably actually not a smart move if you understand this deck, because you're building my board clear for me, but obviously they have no choice with guard, and that's what makes this tough. Straight away, Raiding Brigade. Not the best value for Raiding Brigade, but we're not playing it for value here. We're playing it it's a pure tempo play. This is just keeping board position. And we've got 5 damage, which we're not going to turn down. Opponent's down to 12. We've got strong front line. We've got clear. Red Devils is enabling another sack tank, so our opponent now has to decide where to sack the tank. So they're clearing the scout and the thing. I probably wouldn't have attacked the scouting regiment. I'd have rather left it because I'm giving my opponent card draw, but I think they wanted to keep things alive. Anyway, so now Plan West. 2 more legions on board. Can you see where this turn's going? Underground State's amazing here. No, it's not stuff in the front line, but now we have a really good support line. So even if they can take the front line off us, and we take a hit, it happens. Strat bombing. However, we're not worried because, bizarrely, all they're doing is empowering board clear for later if they do get strength. So obviously we'll take the draw, push the Winter Regiment and swing. This is not a good place for our opponent to be. There are ways for them to work out of this. 20 Panzer Grenadier would be the obvious thing that we're waiting for here. They've got 8 credits. 20 Panzer Grenadier on curve right now would be useful for them. Look, it's 20 Panzer Grenadier on curve. Who knew? So they're going to proc it out. And then they choose to just tear away the Winter Regiment, which I totally understand. We're not in the best of positions right now. We have a lot of orders in hand and not a lot else, but we're not worried because we have some very powerful orders in hand. We'll just take the 2 damage and see what they have to offer. The Karas being on the board, it's not ideal because we don't have any legions for it to buff, but it is still getting us card draw. They're going to proc another tank, obviously. 35T is going to sack out. Oh, they've got 2, so they're going to clear the board if they're smart. They're smart, they clear the board here, which they do. This is awkward. They're starting to develop board position. And we've only got 9 credits, but we did just draw Sheeden. So, what we need to do is tempo out the board and delay until we can win. Uprising. Goodbye, so long, farewell. A bit of card draw gets us Ort Bliskavika. And our opponent now has 10 credits and is probably thinking, okay, I'm in a decent position, I've got 10 credits, I can get some stuff on board. It's going to proc draw, really good stuff. Looks like a strong turn for opponent. Shame they don't have anything to follow up through. Even more of a shame, however, is Uprising. And then I'm just looking, do I want to Bliskavika this? Do I want to Shinano and try and get some board presence? But no, we're going to start just Uprising. And then we drop Tarnow. So Tarnow is a must answer because our opponent has to know that we have intel cards. So they're going to answer it with the M10 and the Greyhound. Now, unfortunately for our opponent, they don't run guards. So they're just dead. And we know they're dead, but they don't. And again, this is just slowing and controlling the board until we're in a clean win position. We don't mind how much damage they deal to our HQ right now, because Sheeden is game. Link, Link, victory. Again, just consistent, solid. Trade out when you need to, make your opponent take bad trades, and repopulate the board, and use clears when you have to delay the game for a win condition. Good result, overall. Next game, same deal as usual. Looking across, and we are playing against a Japan deck. Now, this can be one of the tougher things for us, because we can get outpaced early. Really good opening hand, though. We've got the 94, we've got draw, we've got recon, and we've got Plan West. I'm quite happy to take this. It's not an ideal job, because this is a tough matchup for us. Our opponent's going to have... Now, this surprised me. Direct hit was not what I was expecting. Still, we just keep doing what we do. Yeah, another regiment out on the board. And now we're ramping. Sure, so this is different. And I'm thinking for a minute, do I want to plan West? But because I'm not sure what I'm playing against, I go a bit more conservatively here. push up and get some draw to give me some function in hand. Orp Bliskovika, I'm always happy to see this. Audacity's a great play here. Not a lot we can do about it. It's just going to happen. We're going to put some pressure in the front line, so they kind of need to clear it. Get some legions on the board and hope they hang around long enough to buff. But the Audacity was a good play. Winter Regiment's such a strong drop right now. We know this. We know it can be a tough deal. Winter Regiment can be really hard for us to deal with in this deck. So then we take a moment to think about what we're doing. And I just AWP. The reason being, you just want to get a buff on, get the buff train started on the legions, because I'd ideally like to get them to enough defense that they can in fact survive. Honourable deathing makes sense. So we've got big clear. AA gun comes down. This is looking very bad. We know this is looking very bad. We're not in a great position. I tar now because I'm just putting a target on the board. If it survives, I'll get some value out of it. It almost certainly won't, because our opponent is very capable and knows what they're doing. But they are gonna... Yep, there's Blade of the Samurai, which is fine. There's not a lot we can do about it. So we have Uprising. This is where I measure my Uprising. So Uprising's worth 3 damage right now. I would like to be able to get really good value out of that Uprising. I really would. But I want that Uprising and combination of stuff in my hand to be enough to get me the Winter Regiment too. I want it gone. Now, this is building up, by the way, to me misplaying, which we'll talk about in a minute. So card draw, plan west, really fine. We're going to drop it because we can plan west into Scouting Regiment, in Scouting Party, and get some buffed legions on the board, which hopefully will bait our opponent into destroying them. Now we know our opponent also has To the Last Man, which means they've got a big board clear for late. So here we go. Opponent draws us a card handily, and this is where things start to go south for a bear. Plink, plink, plinkety plink, boom, stuff happens. Now, I plan out a turn and mis-execute it here. So, I've already got the turn in mind, so we've got the card draw, and then what I want to do is, out of the mist, the artillery, because it will reduce the defense of their air, and the bomber, because I can then, in theory, if I play this right, I can then Uprising and get all of this. However, I'm about to do something immensely stupid. I flip the wrong order. I was distracted, I was not concentrating, and I end up reaping some recon. This is not good. I keep playing, I'm going to try and get card draw back and reclaim it, and I do have a board clear in Uprising if I need it, but this was not good. This was a huge loss of both position and tempo by me, a misplay. Said it before and I'll say it endlessly, concentration matters. So now we're in a very difficult position because they've got a really strong backline, and the first thing we're going to do is remove that backline and get some card draw out of it, and this is just messy. From here on out, I am scrabbling to regain position. However, we can get some legions, and we can buff them, which is nice. And we've got another card draw regiment on the board, and we've got 5 cards in hand. But we do know our opponent is not incapable, and we also know this To the Last Man, which we've got to be aware of. The suppress is really a thing, and then I make another mistake in a minute. Right, so this comes out, this comes down, and the first thing that I need to do is make sure that the legions with guard sits over HQ. Because Sheeden's on the board, and I could die from it. However, because I got tilted by my own misplay. Talk about this because this is useful. I was tilted by my own misplay. I was in my own head and frustrated with myself. Because I'm tilted by my own misplay, I misplay again. This is bad. This is game. This is the wrong move, and it has lost me the game, and there is nothing I can do about it at this point. I have no fix unless I can high roll somehow and draw into something, but I don't have any draw. It's really, really bad. And I realise it, and then I'm scrabbling Raiding Brigade, and then even if I get the high roll, I have no draw, I have no way to get the 1 point of damage. I have lost this game because I got tilted, frustrated, and the net result was, well, crap. My opponent, on the other hand, played really well. If you're my opponent and you watch this back, well played. You punished me for a mistake, and I'm sorry I didn't give you a better game. I think you probably would have been able to beat me anyway, even if I hadn't misplayed. But we'll never know, because you got me on a bad day, and I'm really sorry for that if you enjoyed the competition. But we lose. Happens. And getting tilted and twisted happens to all of us. Everyone. Even me. Okay, so next game. Next verse. So Soviets were immediately thinking tokens. There's a lot of it around. Self-damage is also around a bit at the minute. Occasional so there, but tokens is definitely the thing right now. And because that's in my head, I'm very happy to see Signal Regiment. And the Recon's good because it's 2 tokens worth of trading. Into my head. Anyway, Signals down first against tokens is just a thing, because if they're going to start like popping my units, I just want them to take damage for doing it. But now we're seeing a bit of ramp, and we're now not quite sure what this might be. It probably still is tokens, but we don't know. Top deck and play the 94, run the cavalry to the front and see what happens. Nothing else. We've got decent damage on the board. We've done 1. I've got 4 more threatened and 2 if they clear. Petliakov. Now, this is not... I'm not quite sure where my opponent was at with this. So, you can see that I've got 4 damage. Your bomber can't attack back. So this is just sacrificing the bomber, because I'm just going to clear it and then push up to the front line. I get some draw out of it. Hopefully I'll draw something good. If not, we've still got Recon, which goes down. And now we're in a really solid board position, Shinano in hand, which is also not irrelevant when we've got this much pressure. Depths of Winter, very early play. If we didn't have Shinano in hand, I'd be more bothered by this, but with Shinano in hand, Depths of Winter's kind of fine. And at this point, I choose to put the Winter Regiment down, I think, after I've swung, because there's no reason not to. The intel can be saved for when we've got access to either Tarnow much later game or some Legions, which hopefully we'll draw at some point. So it's self-damage, which is not tremendously worrying at the moment. Underground State's amazing. So this is great, because this allows us to deny our opponent board position, force them to replay a unit. It's a classic tempo play, and gives us some intel, and obviously gives us a Legion on board, and our opponent is now down to a whole 11 HQ defense. It's not a fun place to be for our opponent, particularly given that we have intel units. So now we're seeing Night Witches. So this is a very interesting deck, which, if left unchecked, could become problematic. But of course we're not going to leave it unchecked. So I make a choice here. Take time to think about this. Tarnow goes down because it's just value when we put the Recon down, because now we have a buffed pair of Legions, which is always nice. And then I'm just going face. I'm not worried about the bombers. They can pop a bunch of my light infantry, or they can start swinging for the back line. But I can do quite a lot of damage to them. once we get the scouting regiment, the 56th Recon, into the front line, because that can pop and do 2 damage if it becomes relevant. However, at the moment, we're just moving forward, and then scouting party to get board position. I could high roll or attempt to high roll Shinano, but there's no need. We're very strong board position, and we're just going to put our opponent down to 4 and see what they've got. Board clear is kind of what they really need right now. Actually, looking back on it, I could have positioned my legions a little bit better so that I covered one of the light infantry, but since our opponent doesn't seem overly fussed and has bombers, it's not the end of it. So confusion, so now they've cleared out legions, but we do have uprising in hand, so that's a thing. Out of the mist, straight onto this with Shinano. Just reduces the number of points of damage that I have to try and deal to my opponent. Unluckily for them, we high roll the Shinano. But as you can see, we would have been fine because we pop the guard with one of the light infantry, and then we've got 3 damage to face left anyway. So just play out the game the way it goes. There's a good win, and we move on. New opponent. New card back, new thinking. Germany. So this can always be interesting because this could be any number of things at the minute. I've seen a chunk of, obviously, German-Japan mid-range. German tank aggro still out there. And there's quite a bit of playing around with countermeasures going on at the minute, which is interesting to me too. Anyway, so we've got a decent hand here. Orblitzkva. Orbliskava, or Kiva, I really have to learn how to pronounce that. But the Orp is a good draw here, because if it turns out to be that this deck runs any orders, we can pull it. But also HQ defense isn't half bad. We're in a good position. We are, again, credit inefficiency is going to happen with this. We're not worried, because we have the turn 3 that we want. Honor and loyalty, so it's a burn deck, in all likelihood. The only time it is, but at the moment, so this is interesting. Our opponent effectively gained nothing by doing that. They bounced a card off the board, but that's 1 point of damage that no one cares about. And then they drew us cards, which didn't overdraw us, so doesn't help them. So we just plan west and keep going. We've only got 6 cards now in hand. That's fine. We're not worried. I would argue that was a misplay on my opponent's part. If you're going to play Honor and Loyalty, you need to time it very well. But again, they may have just not wanted things to spiral, so your mileage may vary, but I'm always very cautious with Honor and Loyalty as to when I'm playing it, because if it's not getting me value, it's not to do. Our opponent's spending a lot of time thinking now, which is suggestive that they have multiple options. Generally speaking, this is not something you see that much of. I mean, they've done 3 damage to our HQ, but... So we AWP here to see what we can pull. We get Cross of Lorraine, which is actually quite good, because we get some extra just direct damage in hand. Not going to mind. And obviously we've got Legions in position, and of course, all we gains a bunch of HQ defense, which is really good. Our opponent, once again, is thinking. Schutzen comes down. Interesting timing. I'm going to have to eat the Schutzen and the promotion. It's going to happen. There's not a lot I can do. Or I can choose to blunt it. And that's the thought process right now. Is it worth blunting the Schutzen? In the end, I decide it is. By blunting the Schutzen, what I mean is reducing the Schutzen's defense low enough that it can't get its promotion because it's going to be dead. And that's exactly what I choose to do here. It can pop one of my legions, but will pop in return, so it won't get its promotion. It won't deal 3 damage to HQ, so it's blunted the Schutzen. Pretty happy with that as a play. I think it was the right play. I could have gone for more board presence, but it didn't seem necessary. And I'd rather not take the 3 HQ damage just in case this game goes long, because we know that we're dealing with a deck that is going to enjoy overdraw and discard, because we've already seen them show their hand early. Another argument why honor and loyalty you need to be careful about when you play. So that's a terrible trade for our opponent. He loses all the value of the Schutzen. We're in an interesting position now, because envelop. Now, I really should have swung first. This is a misplay on my part. Not the end of the world, but it is frustrating when it happens. I did not pay enough attention to the number of credits my opponent was hanging, and we got enveloped. I'm not worried. We're in a very strong position, but that was a little cranky making. But it's okay. We can just recover board presence, and it does. I'm not feeling that our opponent's high pressure, and as long as we can keep emptying our hand to a relatively low level, their only real play towards their archetype is going to be Phony War. They've got propaganda, so we know this is just pure burn. This is all countermeasures and burn damage. I know this deck. Honestly, I don't rate it. We're in a great position. So again, this is the classic checkerboard I was talking about earlier. We've got good cover and position, and now we just need some intel to build up the strength of our legions. And our opponent has a very difficult board to answer. Air Blitz is not answering the board. This is a direct damage thing, and really this isn't going to be fast enough. This deck is just, it's right now, our opponent does not have a deck which is fast enough to deal with what we've got on the board. At this point, unless our opponent has a way of board clearing its game, I feel it highly unlikely that they do. Most likely we're going to see Phony War in the hope that they can draw enough honor and loyalty to pitch us. Looking at the size of their deck, I don't think that that's statistically likely. This is the sort of thing that goes through my head while I'm watching and considering here. What could they do? And I would imagine that's what's going through their head. We shall see. So, yep, Phony War, which I expected, but they've only got 3 credits to operate with, which means that they can't throw enough honor and loyalty to change the outcome of the game. Fiery Ambush is going to remove one of the threats at the back, because they've just given up at this point. That's fine. We're going to win with a little bit of swagger, because I allow myself a little swagger, because we stole the cross. So we pink, and then we'll just drop the cross and win. It's always nice to be able to do that. Can be fun if your AWP pulls you a really, really good order that you can finish your opponent with. Keep ticking away. Another good win, another good result. Again, the deck is just consistent. Next opponent, next HQ. It's Britain. As I say, you're going to see a chunk of this at the moment. So, take a look at where we go with the mulligan. Obviously, Tarnow's going back. Arguably, you could pitch the recon, but I pitch the scouting party, because really I want to be able to enable some draw, because I'm not... I would like to see... misclick. It happens. Would have been nice not to have seen Sheeden this early. And immediately, so this is an interesting one, because I now immediately know what I'm playing against, and it is going to alter the way that I go about playing this game. So, we are playing against Exile Air, and that means we cannot allow it to get any momentum, because we are not actually, despite having an aggro start, fast enough to deal with Exile Air if it gets on a roll. So, that's what goes straight into my head, and then I'm thinking about how I want these turns to go. I'm thinking about what's in my deck, what do I want to see that is going to give me what I need. I know I've got draw in hand, I know I've got Recon in hand, but I don't want to be playing that Recon. So, draw first. Bombing raid's good to see. Now we've got the Recon we do want to see, and this is the key. I'm not running face. This is not an aggro start anymore. I'm playing this deck much more mid-range, much more conservatively, because I want to remove all of this nonsense. So once again, our opponent drops down. We are very lucky. We pull Audacity, and I just fire it. There's no reason I'm not going to, because removing one of these threats is huge. I just don't want our opponent to get any momentum whatsoever, and I know that on turn 4, I can clear a backline. Sea Patrol, getting rid of this is fine, but this is not a complicated turn 4 for me. Once again, I'm just denying Exile any chance to get going. I'm just hard-breaking Exile. If they have no presence on the board, they have no synergy. If Exile has no synergy, it can't operate. It is not a threat. I'm not worried about it gaining HQ defense and drawing, because if we can push the game late and get presence, we will win. Turn 5, and this is exactly the same logic. Unexpected resistance is annoying. We knew it was a possibility. But ultimately, it was an acceptable risk for me at the time. So we've got the 94, which obviously will push. Now we are going to plink HQ, because obviously we can't remove the fighter. Evasive action, killing the deployment effect does make it slightly disappointing, because we're not going to get as good a trade value out of the Dragon Slayer, but it is still enough to remove. ATS, sure, but you're playing for tempo, so obviously the AA gun is huge here because it's going to make all of their aircraft 1 defense. I'm quite happy to sack out my front line here. This is not a deck that is going to push hard for the front line. I mean, it's got a couple of things in it. Might run the tank. Is almost certainly running Devil's Brigade, but unexpected resistance popping, not a shock. I'm keeping account of how many of them I'm seeing. Generally, Exile only runs 2, but there's no guarantee. This comes down with 1 defense, and our opponent's done because they realise that every aircraft they drop, we're just going to pop with the artillery, unless they can drop multiples. Once you blunt Exile, they're pretty much cooked. They're not going to do much else. Aim for our opponent, but there you go. Okay, and off we go. So we have a mirror match HQ-wise, which could be bad. Against aggro, we can struggle. As I've mentioned before, it's probably not our best matchup. We have to play relatively smart. We still can manage, because if we can get to the game to mid-range, we have the edge, but we need to be aware of the tools that they have, and some of them are very similar to our own. Cav's fine. Now, I'm just going to snap this out, because it's the best play I have, and in this instance, I just don't want to allow my opponent to get any early presence. It's an imperfect choice, because they're probably going to 94 and push that forward, but it's okay, because then we can use their cav to remove it, and here comes the 94 that we would expect to see, which is fine. We'll cavalry it out. Not a problem. And at this point, I pass. Now, I could have played the 56th Recon, but I will endlessly say this. I have I have Plan West, rather, in hand. Turn 3, Plan West. Turn 4, push forward 2 Legions and buff them both twice is huge. And that's what we're going to go for. The 56th Recon in this deck enables the mid-range weight. Okay, so now we can only buff 1 of them, and now we can't buff any of them because our opponent does a thing. However, we can create 2 more and trade cleanly next turn. So our opponent now has 3 3/3s. Now, they can start clogging the front line. Bombing raid would be bad right now. But they're going to run hard for trading. And this can be a good plan if you can get effective enough But we get the Karas down. Now, this is always a big card to get down, because the Karas not only gives us a buff, but draws us a constantly recurring buff, which means our opponent is really going to want to find a way to get rid of that Karas. Panzergren, it's off curve, which means this trade is just, I think, too early. You could probably have survived a bit longer, but we'll see. We plan west again, and unsurprisingly, we recon, getting a buff and do damage. Now, we could have gone for another buff on the legions, but in case they get cleared, I would rather keep them, push them forward, and then be able to have a huge buff turn next turn. Speaking of which, here comes the big push to start trying to clear. We combined arms the tank. Clear a legion, makes sense. But now I have the perfect trade. Recon now does its other job. Trading out nicely, takes out 2 units, push legions, push some support, draw, buff. 94 is a really nice top deck. Got very lucky with that. Push the Yokosuka out, because if it dies, it dies. We can try and cover it with legions in the near future, but right now, it's not a major priority. We just want position, and we have it. Honourable death onto the Karas. They're dealing with it, but they've dealt with it really quite late. It's added a lot of value. Sendai Regiment, immensely predictable. However, overall, not worried. Swing for some damage, bombing raid for even more damage, the clear and the return of our legions. So now we've got 3 legions in the support line. And our opponent has 1 card in hand. And there we go. A very unsurprising and very understandable surrender, because they are very aware that we can snowball hard. Again, just about blunting the threat. Just outside top 200. There we go. So, there we are. That was me. And that was the deck that got me to Field Marshal, and the deck that got me just outside top 200 at the moment. I'm unlikely to push for big numbers, but I've been having fun. It is a fun deck to play if you like to have a bit of thinking time, and like to use tactical tools to do funky things. It can be thought-provoking, and is an interesting deck on many levels. As I say, one of the reasons that the deck is somewhat interesting is that it isn't going to be impacted. I believe, I'm just checking, but I believe this is not going to be impacted at all by the patch. I don't think the balance changes are affecting it. I don't think a single card in this deck is rotating. Very good. I'm just checking that I'm not wrong, because I don't like being wrong. I like to give good advice, so I am literally going through my list. Definitely not going to lose Audacity, are we? No. No. Liskovika's staying. The Ascent is staying. 96 is staying. Bombing Raid is staying. Winter Regiment is staying. Yeah, I believe. Yeah. Sheedan's not going anywhere, and Uprising obviously isn't going anywhere. So, yes. Yeah, this is a deck which is going to be unaffected by the change with the expansion, which is also interesting. I don't know whether it will still be any good, because we really don't know what it's going to look like in the expansion, but it's interesting to me, and I've had a lot of fun on it. Anyway, this was just a bit of variation, because now I've been very on covert operations. This was just a bit of gameplay, and I always like to... I'm going to try more often to talk about Field Marshal and what the experience is like, because it is relevant, and also a bit of gameplay never hurts, and it lets me do a little deck tech every month, which I shall try and do. But yeah, sometimes it might be more than one deck, depending on how my Field Marshal run goes. But this was a really solid deck to get onto, and worked really well. I have a very good win rate on this deck at the minute, which is always a nice sign. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, communicate, all of that good stuff. As always, stay well and be good human beings. I will catch you next time.